Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of control statements in C programming. Today we'll specifically focus on while loops and nested while loops, which are incredibly useful for repeating a block of code multiple times based on a condition. Now let's jump right in. Now before we understand what are while loops, we need to know what is a loop. So a loop basically allows us to execute a block of code repeatedly as long as a specific condition is true. Now, why is this useful? It is useful because it helps reduce code redundancy and improves the efficiency of our program. Now, what do I mean by code redundancy? Now, remember one thing, whenever we are writing code, we should make sure the code is redundant. Okay, that is basically we shouldn't be repeating the same statements again and again. In order to do that, we can use loops or functions. Okay, in this case, a while loop helps in reducing redundancy significantly when we want to execute a particular block or instruction several times. Okay, so let's see what are while loops. Now, like I said, a while loop basically is used for executing a block of code repeatedly. And how does it do this? It executes that same block if the condition is true. So a while loop basically it checks if a condition is true before executing the body. If it is true, it enters the loop and it continues executing unless the condition becomes false. So the syntax for this is very simple. So the syntax for a while loop, for writing a while loop is, I will have the while keyword, then I will have the condition. Now if this condition is true, what will happen is all the statements inside this condition, that is inside this block, will be executed. When it will be executed? If the condition is true. If the condition is false, what will happen? My while loop will exit, or the body will not be executed at all. So we can see this with the help of a simple flowchart. The while loop will first test the condition. If the condition is true, it will execute the body. Once the condition is false, that is after executing the body, it will again check for the condition, and if it is false, it will exit the while loop. Okay, the while loop ends. So let's try to understand this in a much better way with the help of a simple example. So let's take an example. Let's say I want to print the numbers 1 to 5. Okay, so I will take the value count equal to 1, and while while count is lesser than equal to 5, I will print the value of count. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. But however, we are missing one thing here. Now let's see what we are actually missing here. Now if I try to run this program, what will happen is, if I compile and run this, as you can see, just wait for a while. As you can see, my program has got hanged. Okay, so I'll just wait for this to complete. I have killed the program because it has got stuck in an infinite loop. So as you can see here, what is happening here, instead of printing the numbers 1 to 5, the number 1 is being printed repeatedly, cause of which my program hanged. Now what has happened here, my program has gone into an infinite loop. Now this happens when I forget to increment the value of count. Because of this, what is happening is, every time my while loop executes, the condition is turning out to be true. So until the condition is false, it will not exit the while loop. So as a good programmer, we should always keep in mind that we should always ensure that the loop condition should become false and avoid infinite loops, because infinite loops can cause huge problems when writing programs. So this, to avoid infinite loops, okay, and condition should become false. Okay, we will increment the value of count. So don't forget to increment the value so that the condition becomes false. So this is about while loops. Now let us see what are nested while loops. Now nested while loop is basically a while loop inside another while loop. So when we put a while loop inside another while loop, it is called as a nested while loop. Now this is used when we want to perform some complex iterations. Now there are many programs which we will see ahead that use the nested while loop. when we are doing some projects. But for today, let's just understand the syntax of writing a nested while loops. So first we will have a while loop, the outer while loop, which will have a condition of itself, condition 1. If the outer while loop is true, it will execute some statements. Then we will have a inner while loop. We will have a inner while loop, which will have another condition. Now, if this condition is true, it too will execute its own statements. Okay. So what will happen is, let's see the flow of execution. If the outer condition is true, what will happen is this entire block will be executed. Okay. And if it is false, it will exit the loop. Okay. Now coming to the second condition, or the inner while loop, if the inner while loop is true, then the inner block will be executed. Okay. And however, if it is false, the control will go back to the outer condition. So we can see this with the help of the diagram, the flow chart. We have the outer condition or the outer loop condition. If it is true, the inner loop condition is checked. If the inner loop condition is false, my program will go back to the outer while loop. If the inner loop condition is true, then it will keep on repeatedly executing the statements unless it becomes false. And if the outer loop is false, it will exit the program. Okay, it will execute the statements and exit the program. This too, let us understand with the help of another example. So let's take two variables, I and j. So let's say I want to print the tables from 1 to 5, that is up to the value 5. Okay, so I'll take int I is equal to 1 and j. Okay, so while I is less than equal to 5 and j is equal to 1, and while j is less than equal to 5, okay, I will print the tables. Printf starting from 1 will print the table of 1, 1 ones are 1, 1 twos are 2, and so on. %d / -t for tab. Okay, and I will print I into j. And don't forget to increment the value of j, and similarly do not forget to increment the value of I, or my program will go into an infinite loop. So I'll print the new line character for every table, and let's go ahead and run this code. As you can see, we print the tables from 1 to 5. Okay, so this is how, using nested while loops, we can perform complex or calculations. Okay, complex calculations or complex iterations. These are especially used when dealing with matrices and so on, which we will see ahead. So one thing before we wrap up is to keep a few points in mind, that always ensure that the loop condition should become false to avoid infinite loops. Use proper initialization and increment of loop variables. And one more thing, when writing nested while loops, be cautious, because if you write too complex or too deep, use too deep nesting, your program can become hard to understand. And if any errors encountered, it will become a bit difficult to solve them. Okay, so if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more programming tutorials. Thanks for watching and happy coding.